On March 10th, 2026, 11 days into the Iran war, Kim Jong Un stood on the deck of a North Korean destroyer called the Choe-hyun and watched a cruise missile launch. North Korean state media published the photographs. His daughter Kim Joo-ae stood beside him. The caption described the event as Kim overseeing a test of strategic cruise missiles and reinforcing the importance of maintaining and expanding a powerful and reliable nuclear war deterrent. This was not a scheduled test. This was a message. Not to Iran, not to Israel, to Washington. The message was, we are watching what you did to the country that didn't have the deterrent you feared. We have the deterrent you fear. Draw your own conclusions. Kim Jong Un has spent his entire political life building a nuclear weapons program whose entire strategic logic rests on the lesson that states without nuclear weapons get attacked, and states with them do not. The Iran war, the assassination of a head of state, the destruction of a military infrastructure built over 4 decades, the attempt at regime change against a country that was months from nuclear capability but had not yet crossed that threshold, is the most complete validation of that lesson in the post-Cold War era. Kim did not offer Iran weapons. He did not pledge military intervention. He issued condemnation in the strongest language Pyongyang has used in years, and then immediately demonstrated his own capability. That combination, solidarity expressed through rhetoric, strategic message delivered through weapons demonstration, is precisely how a state that has watched the Iran war play out sends the signal it needs to send without escalating into a conflict it has not chosen to enter. But to understand what Kim took from this war, you need to understand what Iran and North Korea built together and why that partnership, spanning 4 decades and flowing in both directions, is the most consequential and least publicly discussed military relationship in modern proliferation history. The partnership that built both programs, the connection between Iran and North Korea, begins in the early 1980s during the Iran-Iraq War. Iran was fighting with an air force it could no longer maintain, and a ground war that required weapons its Western suppliers had cut off. North Korea was a willing alternative. By 1987, U.S. intelligence estimated that North Korea and China together were supplying roughly 70% of Iranian arms imports. The first major transfer was ballistic missiles. North Korea sold Iran the Scud-B, a 300-kilometer range ballistic missile the Soviets had originally developed, providing Tehran with the weapons it used against Iraqi cities in the War of the Cities phase of the conflict. The Scud became the foundation of the Iranian ballistic missile program. Every subsequent development built on that base. The Shahab-1, the Shahab-2, the medium-range systems that Iran eventually developed into the arsenal now being depleted in Operation Epic Fury. The Congressional Research Service documented that Iran's relationship with North Korea provided a qualitative increase in ballistic missile capabilities and advanced Iran toward its goal of self-sufficiency in the production of medium-range ballistic missiles. The technology didn't just flow one way. Iran had what North Korea needed: oil. Specifically, subsidized oil after the Soviet Union's collapse eliminated the primary provider of cheap energy to Pyongyang. Iran expanded its oil exports to North Korea in exchange for missile technology, a barter arrangement between 2 sanctioned states, each possessing what the other needed, running beneath the surface of the international non-proliferation regime for decades. By the 1990s, the relationship had deepened beyond simple hardware transfers. Iranian and North Korean engineers were working on shared development programs. Pyongyang introduced the Scud-C, 500 kilometers of range, and sold it to Iran and Syria. Iranian teams visited North Korean facilities. North Korean advisors worked in Iran. The institutional knowledge flow between the 2 missile programs became a 2-way channel rather than a one-directional supply relationship. The ICBM engine transfer and what it means. The most significant documented transfer in this relationship is also the most alarming in the context of the current war's aftermath. In 2013, North Korea began assisting Iran with the development of an 80-ton rocket booster, the type of large liquid fuel engine that powers intercontinental ballistic missiles. Multiple shipments of rocket components from North Korea to Iran were documented between 2013 and 2016, even as JCPOA negotiations were ongoing. The U.S. Treasury Department imposed sanctions on Iranian companies and individuals, specifically for violating sanctions on North Korea through this exchange. Professor Bruce Bechtel, a proliferation expert at Angelo State University, analyzed the technical details in a 1945 assessment published during the current conflict. His conclusion: the 80-ton booster North Korea transferred to Iran is almost certainly the same engine that North Korea subsequently developed into the Hwasong-12 intermediate-range ballistic missile, the system North Korea used to overfly Japan in 2017, and then the Hwasong-14 and Hwasong-15 ICBMs, assessed as capable of reaching the U.S. East Coast. The engine was developed collaboratively. It was transferred. It exists in both inventories. The ICBM program Iran was building when Operation Epic Fury launched was not built in isolation from the ICBM program. North Korea already has operational. They share a technological lineage that runs through the same engineering decisions made by teams from both countries working together on the same rocket. This is why the 2026 Iran war is not merely a Middle Eastern conflict from Pyongyang's perspective. Iran's missile program and North Korea's missile program are the same missile program at different stages of development, running on shared technology, built on a foundation of 40 years of cooperation. When the United States destroys Iran's ballistic missile infrastructure, it is destroying, or attempting to destroy, a program that North Korea helped build and from which North Korea has benefited technically. The hypersonic connection. The Fatah-2, Iran's hypersonic glide vehicle that struck an IDF command center on March 1st and evaded 2 Israeli interceptors, added another dimension to the proliferation question that defense analysts began asking immediately after the first confirmed combat use. Before Iran's Fatah-2, only Russia, China, and North Korea had operational hypersonic glide vehicles. North Korea tested its Hwasong-16B hypersonic glide vehicle in 2024 and reached service entry the same year. The flight profile documented in footage from the Fatah-2's combat strikes was assessed by multiple defense analysts to resemble Russian and North Korean hypersonic glide vehicle behavior. The trajectory, the maneuver envelope, the terminal phase, all consistent with the same family of designs. Military Watch magazine and other defense publications have noted the close technical relationship between Iran's and North Korea's advanced missile programs and assessed that hypersonic glide vehicle technology may have moved through the same channels that transferred ICBM engines a decade earlier. This is not confirmed by either government. But the pattern? North Korea develops a capability, Iran demonstrates a similar capability months or years later, and the technical signatures resemble each other, has repeated across enough systems that analysts treat the channel as an established feature of the relationship, rather than a coincidence. The implication for the current war is this: the weapons that made the Iran campaign harder than expected, the Fatah-2 that defeated Israeli missile defense, the Shahed swarms that overwhelmed. U.S. interceptors, the cluster warhead missiles that split before impact, did not emerge from Iranian engineering alone. They emerged from a 40-year collaborative development relationship with a state that is watching their destruction from a distance and drawing conclusions about what to build next, what Kim took from watching Khamenei die. On February 28, 2026, the United States launched a strike specifically designed to kill the leadership of a state it had designated as hostile. It succeeded. Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader of the Islamic Republic, a man who had held ultimate authority over Iran for 35 years, was killed in the first wave of Operation Epic Fury alongside his family members in his own compound. 38. North, the leading analytical publication on North Korean affairs, identified what this means for Kim Jong Un's strategic calculation. Pyongyang's condemnation of the strikes can be seen as a move aimed at easing regime insecurity over the possibility of a decapitation strike, however slim that prospect may be. The Korea Herald's analysis was more direct. From the standpoint of regime security, the Kim Jong Un regime's denunciation of the strikes as a violation of sovereignty functions as preemptive political signaling against any future external attempt to undermine its own system. Kim Jong Un has built his entire strategic posture around the proposition that nuclear weapons are the ultimate guarantee of regime survival. The Iran war is the most vivid demonstration since the end of the Cold War of what happens to a leader who was close to nuclear capability but had not yet crossed the threshold. The lesson Kim drew is not that Iran should have been more open to diplomacy. The lesson Kim drew is that Iran should have been faster. This lesson has immediate operational implications. Kim presided over the cruise missile test on March 10th, and he oversaw a visit to a weapons factory. He attended a sniper competition. Every public event in the days following the Iran war's opening strikes was designed to communicate the same thing. North Korea is armed, North Korea is watching, and North Korea is deterrent. Is real and will be maintained regardless of what happened to Iran's. But there is a second lesson that Kim took from watching the Iran war. One that the cruise missile test demonstrates but does not fully articulate. The THAAD, redeployment and the Korean Peninsula Gap. On March 10, 2026, the United States Army began relocating parts of the Terminal High Altitude Area defense system, THAAD, from South Korea to the Middle East. The announcement came on the same day Kim Jong Un's cruise missile photographs were published. The timing was almost certainly not accidental from Pyongyang's perspective. THAAD in South Korea is the primary high-altitude missile defense system protecting the Korean peninsula against North Korean ballistic missile attack. It is also a system that China has consistently opposed as destabilizing and whose deployment has been a persistent point of diplomatic friction in the region since 2017. Its redeployment, even partial to the Middle East, creates a defense gap in exactly the geography that North Korea's missile forces are designed to threaten. Defense News reported that Seoul expressed concern over the transfer and that U.S. Forces Korea simultaneously issued a statement that it remains focused on maintaining a combat-credible force posture on the Korean peninsula, language that is standard boilerplate for a command that is explaining away a capability reduction. The Iran war is consuming American missile defense infrastructure at a rate that has implications far beyond the Middle East. The same shortage of THAAD interceptors, the same depletion of PAC-3 missiles, the same destruction of AN/TPY-2 radars that is defining the tactical situation in the Gulf is simultaneously degrading the strategic architecture in the Indo-Pacific. A conflict that was designed to solve the Iran problem has created a window of reduced U.S. defensive capability in exactly the theater where North Korea and China have the most to gain from that reduction. Kim knows this arithmetic. He has staff who track U.S. defense posture in the Indo-Pacific. He has satellite imagery of THAAD installations in South Korea. He is watching the same news that everyone else is watching, and he is reading it through a strategic lens that has been focused on this specific vulnerability for years. A cruise missile test from a destroyer on March 10th, the same day THAAD redeployment begins, is not a coincidence. It is a deliberate signal that Pyongyang has noticed the shift and is reminding Washington that it exists and can fill the space being created. What comes after the Iran war ends? The South China Morning Post, analyzing the post-war trajectory of the Iran-North Korea relationship, published an assessment that frames the medium-term implication clearly. Analysts say it is likely to do so again once the war ends. The "it" is the missile and nuclear cooperation that has defined their relationship for 40 years. Cho Han-bo, senior analyst at the Korea Institute for National Security, was direct. North Korea and Iran will likely resume cooperation in missiles and rebuilding uranium enrichment facilities as Iran acutely feels the need to secure capabilities to mount massive retaliatory attacks. The logic is straightforward. Iran's ballistic missile program has been partially destroyed. Its nuclear infrastructure has been struck twice in 9 months. Its underground facilities have been sealed or damaged. When the war ends, whenever it ends, Iran will begin rebuilding. And the most efficient path to rebuilding a ballistic missile program that was built in partnership with North Korea is to return to that partnership. North Korea, meanwhile, has every incentive to participate. The Iran war has demonstrated that North Korea's own missile and drone technology, transferred to Iran across the decades of the partnership, performed in combat. Shaheds and Fatah-2s and cluster warhead missiles were all used in real war against real adversaries. The performance data from that combat use is invaluable for any state seeking to refine its own weapons designs. Iran's experience is North Korea's data. The diplomat analysis identified an additional dimension. Iran's shift to using its own material in its own war has created a gap in the supply to Russia's Ukraine campaign. Iran has been one of Russia's primary drone suppliers. With Iranian drones now being consumed in the Middle East rather than shipped east, Russia's dependency on North Korean supply has increased. North Korea fills the gap. Russia gains leverage. Pyongyang gains influence. The triangular relationship between Moscow, Tehran, and Pyongyang, each supplying what the others need, each gaining strategic cover from the other's relationships, grows denser as the Iran war disrupts the previous equilibrium. The Korea Herald's analysis concluded that support for Iran ultimately means support for and solidarity with the Russia-led Eurasian Charter, the emerging multipolar strategic architecture that aligns sanctioned and revisionist states against the U.S.-led international order. Kim Jong Un's 2 KCNA statements on the Iran war were not about Iran. They were about positioning North Korea within that architecture, at a moment when the architecture is under stress and its participants are evaluating their mutual commitments. The instruction manual. Here is what Kim Jong Un now knows, with greater certainty than he had before February 28th that he knew before. First, a decapitation strike against a head of state is not a theoretical American capability. It is an operational one. The intelligence architecture, the precision, and the political will to execute it exist and have been demonstrated. Second, underground infrastructure, even when extensive and deeply buried, has finite resistance to the GBU-57 and to sustained B-2 campaigns. The entrances can be sealed. The ventilation shafts can be targeted. The fortress can become a tomb. Third, missile defense systems can be overwhelmed. Drone swarms can slip through. Hypersonic glide vehicles can evade interceptors. The cost asymmetry between cheap attack weapons and expensive defenses favors the attacker if the attacker has enough inventory. Fourth, nuclear deterrence is not a guarantee against conventional military action. It is a guarantee against conventional military action that would risk nuclear retaliation. Iran was not nuclear. That distinction mattered enormously. Fifth, and most important, the war ended, or appears, to be moving toward ending. Not because Iran surrendered, but because the economic costs of the Strait of Hormuz closure, the global energy shock, and the political pressure of an open-ended conflict created pressure on both sides for a negotiated exit. Iran survived long enough to create sufficient cost to force a conversation. Kim Jong Un's conclusion from that fifth lesson is that the path to deterrence is not simply having nuclear weapons. It is having enough of everything: missiles, drones, cyber capability, economic leverage, international relationships, to make the cost of attacking North Korea calculable in terms that exceed any American administration's political threshold. He already has more of that than Iran did. He's building more every day. And every day that American missile defense assets remain deployed in a Middle Eastern war rather than positioned on the Korean peninsula is a day that the gap between what he is building and what stands against it is slightly wider than it was the day before. Kim Jong Un is not watching the Iran war as a tragedy for a partner. He is watching it as a textbook. And the notes he is taking will shape the next crisis, in a different theater, at a different time, in ways that March 2026 cannot yet fully see.